Welcome to the Korea Pro podcast. I'm your host, Jeongmin Kim, the editorial director of Korea Pro.
And I'm John Lee, the editor of Korea Pro.
Join us for a weekly 15-minute conversation as we dive into the most pressing stories shaping South Korea and dissect the most complicated ones for you.
From politics to culture, technology to society, we've got you covered. So stay ahead of the curve and never be sidelined again.
So get ready for a fresh perspective on South Korea's news. This is the Korea Pro podcast.
Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of the Korea Pro podcast. Today is Thursday, February 20th. It's a little bit before 5 p.m. And today, besides me, we have Jeongmin and Joon Ha at the studio. All right, Joon Ha, please kick us off with the latest domestic politics developments that our listeners should be aware of.
Yeah, so the main thing is the Constitutional Court proceedings that happened, the first one that happened this week, that happened a couple of days ago, and one that's happening currently as we are speaking. It's around 4:54 p.m. today, and it does look like the Prime Minister, Duck-soo, is speaking in front of the Constitutional Court judges.
What's his position?
His position is basically that he's going against everything that Yoon has testified. Yoon has testified that he was informing the cabinet ministers, that the cabinet ministers, some agreed with him. However,
on December 3rd,
on December 3rd.
However, one of them is committing perjury.
And Duck-soo has committed to the fact that Yoon was not very capable of explaining his rationale for martial law to his cabinet ministers.
That's the most polite way of saying he wasn't making any sense, right?
I actually added that. And that was not Han Duck-soo's exact words. And Han Duck-soo, he actually went on to say that within martial law, Yoon actually asked him to go to some public events in his stead as head of state. So there are a couple of developments that are going on within the Constitutional Court. It does look like that today there's no further proceedings that have been announced yet. So as of now, it does look like the proceedings have stopped for witness testimonies as of today. If the witness testimonies stop as of today, they'll go into sort of a investigative judgment period.
Right, Is that after the final pleading?
Yes. Final pleading, after the final pleading and after the witness testimonies, they'll go into sort of a final investigative judgment on whether they uphold the impeachment or not. And a final decision is probably expected first or second week of March.
Right, because it usually takes within 2 weeks after the final pleading session, right?
Mm-hmm.
We won't make any guesses about how the impeachment rulings are going to go, which direction. But it does look like when it comes to the polls that we have been touching on every week in our analyses and the podcasts, it looked like the trend is continuing from the past 2 or 3 weeks. The conservatives consolidating around the main conservative party. It's really still unclear who is leading the polls when it comes to conservative potential next leader, and also Han Dong-un sort of coming back. He announced, or more
he plans to publish a book.
Implied that he might be coming back, writing a book about how people comes first. It sounds very Moon Jae-in.
Apparently, there are pre-orders for 300,000 copies of his book already.
It's number one. Yeah.
So we also have to talk about, whenever we talk about these polls, we also have to mention that although it's not proven, there's always a lot of noise going on behind the scenes or by pundits, that there's a lot of manipulation of these polls. Now, again, we're not quite sure how much weight that we can give all of these allegations, but it is there.
It is there. And also there are a lot of mistrust about the public opinion polls these days, but the numbers are less important. I think the time progression sort of comparison is more important. And looking at that, the trend is pretty clear that the support for DP at least gradually decreased in the past few weeks, with the PPP support gradually increasing and sort of maybe not taking over the lead in all polls, but at least the gap has been narrowing down. And the anti-impeachment sentiment also very gradually still increasing, but it's still the majority view that the people uphold impeachment. They wish the Constitutional Court would uphold the impeachment.
And it also really matters on which poll that you're looking at, because according to some polls, which I will not mention here, President Yoon's approval rating is nearing 50%.
And that's crazy because I said it, it's crazy because a lot of the major pollsters, NBS, Gallup, and Realmeter, to note, they removed that question from their weekly or bi-weekly polls because he is not doing anything as a president right now. And technically, that question is supposed to ask the citizens whether or not South Korean president is performing well or not. And he's not performing anything besides the Constitutional Court proceedings right now.
So that 50% poll, assuming that it's even accurate, it's not even about a poll about whether or not they support his performance. It's about whether or not they support him.
Or conservative loyalty, if we broaden the affiliation a little bit when we are interpreting that.
Okay, moving on. Now, for those of you listeners who tuned in last week, you will have noted that Jeongmin was not here in the studio, and that's because she was way too cool to hang out with us. Where were you last week, Jeongmin?
I was in Munich. I attended the Munich Security Conference as part of the Munich Young Leaders 2025 delegation through funding by a foundation that hosts these delegations. It was personally a big honor, but also it was quite tragic actually on the first day to actually be there looking at the optics because I got there so excited with other young leaders and like, wow, the main hall. And then the kickoff video started in front of hundreds of audience, the high-ranking leaders from all over the world. And then they were playing this video about the main topic, multipolarization in, many different parts of the world. And they were showing these clips of editorialized slideshows of the leaders that were very problematic throughout the past year. And then...
Who was there?
My president.
Our president. We're all Koreans here.
Sorry. Our president, Mr. Yoon Suk-yeol's photo was displayed in front of the background image of South Korean protesters in front of the National Assembly. And it was a photo of Mr. Yoon declaring the martial law on December 3rd.
I hope that the image caption said, "Mama, I finally made it."
There was no caption, but my colleagues that were sitting with me at the balcony instantly all looked at me. And that was actually one of the main things that I've experienced throughout that weekend in Munich. It was my first time attending it. And whenever I mentioned that I introduced myself as someone from South Korea, I expected people would bring up issues more related to North Korea and its troops to Russia. It did come up from time to time, but mostly the comments were about something like, oh, I've heard that you guys are going through a lot of political turmoil in South Korea domestically, and it is a global phenomenon, they said.
I never thought I would miss being asked about size Gangnam Style, but here we are.
Yeah, I know. And then the first day kicked off not only with that video, including Yoon Suk-yeol's photo, but also, of course, what everybody waited for, J.D. Vance's speech.
That's a sentence that I never thought anyone would ever say. I'm excited to listen to J.D. Vance. But okay, again, here we are.
Excited in a sense that we were not excited about the potential content of it, but we were just excited to hear what he has to say, basically, because there were a lot of rumors swirling around the corridors about the potential negotiations kicking off between Russia-US or Russia-Ukraine or US-Ukraine, whatever we thought it might happen. But then Vance ended up just mentioning Ukraine once in a very generic sentence, saying that, I hope it resolves soon sort of sentence. But instead, what he delivered was
an
very
RNC stump speech.
I know, it's a very long speech focused on what democratic value means.
Right.
With a huge asterisk.
Yes. And so looking at the responses, I just wrote an op-ed about it, but I could not really quite include all the impression that I got, but it was very, very awkward being there and looking at the European leaders' responses. He made a joke about Elon Musk, basically, at one point, knowing that a lot of people were just staring at him stone-faced without applauses. He said, if we can survive Greta Thunberg lecturing that we will die in 10 years, you can survive 5 years of Elon Musk.
Yes, because I remember Joe Biden hiring Greta Thunberg as a government official overseeing every single government department.
Exactly. And then right after that, we can clearly see it was like a symbolic moment of how the transatlantic unity is not there anymore, because to that joke, maybe 5 people were like clapping and like bursting out laughing, but then others were staring at the people who were clapping. So the contention was just immense from the start.
Okay, so we got all of that, but now let's redirect it to South Korea. As the quote-unquote young South Korean delegate leader...
Oh, thanks for considering me young, by the way. Thank you.
You are. So let's, once again, bring it back to South Korea. Now, you wrote a mic drop of an op-ed that was just published today, and by the time you listeners are hearing this episode, it's already been uploaded for a few hours. So, what was your takeaway?
The idea started off with recounting what Vance was talking about and trying to figure out why he went for that topic. It also leads back to South Korea's dilemma and other Indo-Pacific Asian countries' dilemma, looking at what Vance's speech was signifying. At first, like you mentioned, a lot of the people in the audience thought, oh, this is a speech that's aimed at domestic audience, or he is trying to influence German election was the initial response. But then if you look closely, choosing the conference room to deliver something related to, basically American values and European values, like not seeing eye to each other anymore. It's sort of, from Korean perspective, looking at that as country that sort of developed its democratic values based on, looking at American values and European values recently as well. It's sort of like a moment that we potentially looking at this moment that we have to sort of choose between the two at one point, because we're not part of the European nations staring at Vance in the audience and talking about Europeans will not stand the tariffs, unjustified tariffs against the European Union. South Korea does not really have anything like that. So from South Korea's perspective, especially when it comes to the current administration that focus so much on this so-called phrase like-mindedness with the Western democratic bloc.
Shared values.
Shared values. That bloc, unified bloc, does not exist anymore, was a sort of like a wake-up call for me as a South Korean perspective listening to that. Because in the past 3 years, after the South Korean administration, say what you will about Yoon, but the global pivotal state vision was very much liked by the, like-minded, so-called like-minded partners, not just NATO, European countries, Americans alike.
I liked it.
Me too. And then we spent 3 years, South Koreans spent 3 years really focusing on and trying to deliver what we can. When it comes to, proving that we are actually like-minded, we will support the countries who are invaded, unprovoked aggression, so to say, from Russia to Ukraine, for instance, and, even rhetorically condemning countries that conduct actions like that. We joined cybersecurity initiatives, Indo-Pacific economic security initiatives, a whole lot of platforms, and now NATO IP4, Indo-Pacific for countries, right?
And then martial law happened.
And then martial law happened, which was also, I'll get to that, but which was a few officials that talked to me on the sidelines were mentioning it was annoying to see, because after 3 years of seeing the gradual increase of South Korea's status, international status as someone actually posed like a beacon of democracy in Asia Pacific, Indo-Pacific, and then at home, Yoon does something that actually deteriorates its own democratic values at home. But that's a separate subject right now.
I hope that when they said annoying, it was Diplo speak for I'm flipping the tables over.
There were some swear words involved, actually, but I did not say that into the article. But it's actually, I could see the frustration. It was pretty evident that a lot of people were monitoring South Korean domestic turmoil closely, and the damage was already done. But aside from South Korea's responsibility going forward to rebuild their reputation that we are actually standing by democratic institutions and values, by the way, a lot of countries actually praise South Korean democratic institutions working to a certain extent after the martial law, which I really appreciated. But
all right, but we have to go back to the whole like-mindedness. As you mentioned in your piece, that phrase has become a lot more meaningless over the past few weeks.
Right. In the subhead, you mentioned we might be stuck in South Korea may be stuck in the no man's land, geopolitical no man's land, if South Korea does not really clarify and choose a strategy as soon as possible.
Right. In Washington, there's a new administration that has doubled down on transactional relations. In Europe, they are now busy getting burned by the US and trying to formulate their own cohesive bloc. Good luck with that. Where does that leave South Korea?
That's the $1,000,000 question, and I don't have an answer to that. That's why I wrote this as an op-ed, not an analysis, because if it's an analysis, I should be giving you the answer. But it was just like a whole lot of confusion, but also leaves a lot of challenges and tasks for whoever's coming in as South Korea's next administration. But also, it leaves a challenge for European countries as well, not just South Korea or in the Pacific nations. This is a moment when Europe, let's say, have to reconsider what the value of Asian and the Pacific sort of countries are to them, because it was a very convenient few years for this concept of like-mindedness to work for everybody.
We'll always have Camp David.
Right. Well, the idea of like-mindedness at first was actually very small. It was between Nordic countries and Netherlands, very economic sort of term. And then it gradually expanded after a Cold War into sort of security and diplomacy and democratic values, sort of political sort of sense. And then that's when it started to get complicated, because it's not a term like an ally or a free trade agreement partner. It's a very flexible term that you can use if you want, case by case. And in the past few years, since the Ukraine war, from South Korea's perspective, which started seeing this use of term from government, diplo speak, we refer to NATO, Europe, Japan, US, everybody as like-minded partners. Basically, anyone aside from Russia and China, North Korea, right? But then now, after, creating this whole policy structure around the idea of like-minded partners as actual diplomatic category, it does not exist anymore. And then if Europe is actually serious about, trying to persuade the world that we should sort of stand against the US version of democratic values and what it should look like, they should take the Indo-Pacific partners more seriously, rather than having them as a diplomatic side project, sort of visiting them while they are visiting somewhere else, or having like a side session talking about small states.
Well, that's what they should be doing. But again, as I alluded to earlier, good luck with that. The Europeans can't ever seem to agree on much amongst themselves even. I mean, just ask how Japan's attempts to try to get a NATO liaison office in their country went. And that's where we are right now.
And I have a question to you guys as well. You guys were monitoring this development back in Seoul as well. And how was the sort of reaction in Seoul looking at this transatlantic divide happening? And to you specifically, John, during that security conference, there were a whole lot of developments when it comes to tariffs and trade as well. So walk us through it as well.
Well, when it comes to the Munich Security Conference meeting, I personally did not see that much interest within South Korea. Sure, we saw the regular headlines.
And that says something about it, right?
Yeah, we saw the headlines and everything, and we saw that Foreign Minister Cho Tae-yeol was going to meet with Marco Rubio.
There's no reaction from domestic political parties.
They only reported on the trilateral meeting and the bilateral meeting rather than the conference itself, right?
Exactly. As far as the South Korean public and the different parties are concerned, this was just a foreign policy thing that was done as a perfunctory sort of a ritual more than anything else.
Which is also concerning, considering that both political parties, or the big political parties, are considering a national presidency.
Exactly. They're considering the national presidency, but we have to remember that it's election season, whether the Constitutional Court has made that judgment or not. And when it comes to elections, people don't really care, never have and never will, about foreign policy.
In South Korea, you mean?
In any country. They always care about domestic politics.
That's a pretty big argument to make.
And I'm willing to die on this hill. And so
Even
at
with
least
America.
for now, definitely. Foreign policy might be a very easy sell. Ooh, we give too much foreign aid or whatever the arguments that's being made.
Is that a Trump impression again?
No, it was not. It was a very terrible one of whoever was in my imaginary picture. But the point is, yes, it might be easy to blame foreign aid or whatever it is that they want to blame. But in the end, it's never about foreign policy. It's always about domestic politics.
You mean it's always local?
All the time. All politics is always local all the time. And so here in South Korea, we have seen the Democratic Party and the People Power Party just butting heads repeatedly over exactly domestic politics. And that's exactly why this entire event going on in Munich was just treated as a completely distant, almost alien thing.
So I think that's overall, that symbolizes how South Koreans perceive Europe in general, actually.
Europe is very far away from here.
And that sort of partly explains the South Koreans, public sentiment about Ukraine war and the aid and everything as well, which I was asked multiple times why South Koreans are not like so much willing to actually contribute compared to the government rhetoric about it. So that kind of explains it, right? But back to tariff and trade, which also has local responses a lot as it relates to economy. So what's the latest with the tariffs?
I want you to imagine an ostrich that has dug its head into the sand so deep that you cannot even see any part of its neck.
Is that you?
That's exactly what the South Korean government is doing right now.
Right, okay.
If you look at the acting president's remarks about the tariffs, he just downplayed the entire threat completely. He said that, we don't have to worry about the reciprocal trade tariffs that Trump is threatening because if you look at the overall tariffs that South Korea has on U.S. goods, it's less than 1%. There's 0% taxes on industrial goods. We're fine. But that is such a technocratic way of looking at things, which is exactly what Choi Sang-mok is. He's a technocrat.
Right.
Donald Trump is not. He doesn't look at free trade deals or he doesn't look at any of that through that same lens. If he thinks anything is a tariff, which he has said at a value-added tax is a tariff, he said that non-market barriers is a tariff. He said any kind of subsidy that helps local business is a tariff. Everything to him is a tariff. And so when he counts all of this, especially with whatever is going on in any country, of course in South Korea as well, he's going to say, all right, 30% or whatever number he decides to come up with. And South Korea is going to get beaten hard.
Joon Ha and I were holding back laughter when John was trying the Trump impression, probably.
This
again.
time was a Trump administration, impression, thank you.
And you mentioned tariff like 10 times, and devil's advocate, you said Che sort of played it down, right?
Yes, he did, very much so.
But also, isn't that usually, especially if you're an acting president, wouldn't that be the government officials' responsibility
Just
to
allay
dial
public
down the
concerns.
sense of fear in the society, because that could sort of relate to market prices going up and down like in stocks.
In this case, I think it does the exact opposite.
Yeah?
Because people are not stupid. People already know that these tariffs are coming. If you look at consumer sentiment indexes, if you look at what the business sentiment index is, if you look at the loans that are being taken out, the business loans, if you look at the amount of bank deposits that have been withdrawn over the past month, people know what's coming. They're already preparing. But if the acting president or the president, or whoever it is, downplays things like this, there's just such a disconnect between political rhetoric and what's actually already being felt and what's already happening on the ground.
I see. So you're saying that sort of sense of disconnect between reality and the technocrats' remark actually could feed into even more fears? That South Korea's not ready.
Markets are always run on two things, fear and greed. And yeah, it makes sense to try to tamp down fear. We don't want irrational fear going around everywhere. Maybe Trump's tariffs will not be as debilitating as some of us fear that they will be. But at the same time, I think it is a president's responsibility to make sure that people are ready for what's about to come.
Right. That's why we need a president in a democratic country.
Looking to stay informed about South Korea's fast-evolving political, business and cultural landscape? Join us on Korea Pro, the go-to resource for in-depth analysis expertly curated by top-tier professionals. And now you can pick the membership level that best suits your needs, thanks to our new subscription packages. Starting at just $199 annually, you can access daily analysis and our weekly podcast. Or try our premium membership package, which offers additional perks such as executive briefings, monthly reports and forecasts, networking receptions and event opportunities, as well as much, much more. To find the best fit for you, just head to signup.koreapro.org and become a member today.
Week ahead. What's up next week, Joon Ha, in domestic politics?
So domestic politics, we'll see a couple more hearings related to the martial law. couple, they're mostly investigative hearings, so usually just military officials that were related to martial law, and some presidential office officials will be participating and answering lawmakers' grilling questions. Regards to not just next week, but sometime near the end of March, Yoon's criminal hearing, his criminal trial hearing, his next procession is set to happen on March 24th. His first one happened today. It just ended within 13 minutes. I think it was just regular proceedings, and then they'll start the immediate investigation sometime in March 24.
Also, this is not specifically about Korea, but it will have direct implications to not just South Korea, but most of the countries around the world. Ukraine-related developments, it will be very important to monitor. We heard over the weekend and early this week about the Saudi talks between U.S. and Russian side. Ukraine keeps saying that they basically disagree with this concept, right? And they also claim that they are not invited and so on and so forth. So it will be very important to monitor because it has direct impact for South Korean defense industries and the whole issues that we just discussed earlier about transatlantic relations and like-mindedness.
And all of this information will be sent to your email inboxes by 2 p.m. on Monday. So if you'd like to know more, please subscribe. Have a good weekend, everyone.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in.
If you want to know more, sign up for our daily executive briefings. We brief you on all you need to know from the past 24 hours and why they matter every morning in your inboxes.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for your weekly dose of insight. And until next time, I'm Jeongmin Kim.
And I'm John Lay. Stay connected, stay informed, and we'll see you next time on the Korea Pro Podcast.